Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the mist of ancient Cambodia, to the heart of the Khmer Empire, where stone temples rise out of the jungle like forgotten dreams. You arrive barefoot. The sky is still dusky heavy with dew, and Angkor Wat looms ahead. Its towers not yet gold with sunlight, just silhouettes against a sky that hasn't quite decided to be blue. The ground is soft beneath your soul, packed earth dusted with sand. Morning birds shriek like overexcited flutes, and something in the distance splashes, maybe a monkey, maybe a crocodile, maybe just your nerves. Because in the dark quiet, the scale of this place gets to you. It's massive, silent, unbothered by your existence. You probably won't survive this, in modern traffic anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is for you down in the comments. I'm always curious where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first steps past the moat, over a sandstone causeway, still lined with the headless remnants of gods and demons. Most tourists haven't arrived yet. That's your trick show up before the sun, and you'll have the stones to yourself. Or almost. There's already someone ahead, a local guide in flip-flops lighting incense at a shrine tucked behind a collapsed balustrade. He glances at you, nods, and disappears into the jungle. Like a wisp of time. You pause and look up. The towers don't look carved. They look grown. Like they just erupted out of the earth one humid morning, which is kind of the magic because no one was carving in a hurry here. They were building for centuries, with peace purpose and more patience than anyone today could fake through a morning commute. The walls around you are covered, literally blanketed in bas-relief carvings. Miles of them. Dancers, elephants, celestial armies, scenes from the Ramayana, epic battles where no one seems to bleed. You reach out and touch a section near the western gallery. It's cool, smooth in some places, chipped in others. You trace a line that used to be a cheekbone, a smile, a shoulder. The stone has aged, but the intention remains. This entire place was once a living project, a spiritual mega structure constantly in motion. Carvers didn't rush. They weren't being timed with a stopwatch. No one's yelling deadline or optimize the pipeline. In fact, most of them weren't even professional sculptors. Many were monks, apprentices, or just generational artisans. They worked slowly in meditative shifts, often under the guidance of elders who spoke more through example than words. And the scale? Yeah, it's intense. Angkor Wat alone has over 13,000 square meters of reliefs. That's about 3 football fields of storytelling chiseled one gentle stroke at a time. And they didn't have laser levels, air compressors or mood boards. Just metal on stone and a kind of cosmic patience that would make even the Dalai Lama tap his foot. Historians still argue whether the carvers were part of a central guild or just temple-specific locales, maybe a mix of both. The truth, no one really knows. Khmer scribes didn't document their workshops with IKEA clarity. Most of what we know comes from the walls themselves and a few stone inscriptions that read more like prayers than project logs. But the vibe, peace, calm, repetition. No signs of forced labor or whips at the quarry. Just quiet collaboration passed down hand to hand like a secret song. As the light finally breaks through the treetops, the carvings shift. Shadows move across the figures, giving them a kind of animation. The dancers flicker, the gods stretch, and that grinning demon at your elbow. He seems to wink. You sit on a crumbled step and exhale. The cicadas are awake now, and the air is warming. But the stillness remains, because for all its drama, Angkor doesn't rush you. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And tonight, that's all you need. You follow the sound before you see the scene. It's faint at first, like distant raindrops on hollow wood. But as you pass deeper into the maze of stone galleries, the rhythm sharpens. Clink, clink, pause, clink. There it is again. And then around a more softened corner, you find them. Two men and a boy squatting low in the shade of an ancient colonnade, tapping patiently at a wide, flat panel of sandstone. They're not reenactors. They're modern conservators, trained in traditional carving techniques here to restore a broken panel near the Hall of 1,000 Buddhas. But for a moment, if you blur your eyes, it could be 1100 CE all over again. They barely speak, just tap and scrape and blow the dust away with gentle puffs. The boy, probably 12, isn't carving yet. He holds a smooth coconut bowl filled with water and a sponge made from bark fiber, dabbing the stone occasionally to reveal the lines as they form. His eyes never leave the chisel. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. And now you understand something essential about Khmer relief carving. It's music. Or at least it's played like music. Every tap has a tone. Every chisel has a weight, a tempo, a voice. It's not just stonework, it's performance art. You crouch nearby, respectful of the silence, and look at the stone they're working on. It's the lower section of a celestial battle, swirling limbs, garlands, flags a charging horse, with impossibly perfect ears. You can't even draw that, let alone chisel it. And yet, they do. The ancient carvers used iron or bronze chisels shaped for delicate line work or rough depth. No mallets made from fancy hardwoods or imported stuff, just palm or tamarind. The wood wears down fast, but no one minds. In fact, they say part of the magic comes from working with tools that demand constant attention. Nothing permanent. Everything, even your hammer, needs care. Quirky. Tidbit time. One of the oddest finds at Angkor Thom was a cache of discarded carving tools buried near a temple. Stepped almost like an offering. Some scholars think worn tools were ritually retired, given back to the earth in tanks. Others argue they were just trash pits. But come on, you don't bury your trash neatly wrapped in banana leaf, do you? Historians still debate whether different parts of a temple were assigned to different crews by specialization, like hands-only guys, elephant teams, or crown embellishers. Or if more likely, every carver just slowly graduated from background vines to full-blown divine eyebrows over years of repetition. You reach out and touch a completed panel nearby. It's been weathered, sure centuries of rain. Birds, humans, bats, but still the details stun you. There's a horse with tassels curling in the wind. A deity holding a conch. A soldier laughing mid-battle. Yes, laughing. These weren't generic templates. They were full of life, of fun. Sometimes even inside jokes. One theory goes that Khmer carving incorporated visual rhythms, not just aesthetic harmony, but spiritual pacing. Like visual mantras, repeated motifs that settle the viewer into a kind of meditative trance. A row of dances becomes more than just decoration. It becomes a prayer in stone. You don't just look at it. You feel your breath slow. You match its flow. The carvers too likely breathed in rhythm with their strokes. Tap, exhale, tap, inhale. It's said some carved to chants, others to silence, but all in a tempo that never rushed. Even today, the conservators stop carving when their breath feels off. The boy tells you this in a whisper, proud to pass on the secret. A red ant crawls across your sandal, reminding you that, yes, this place is still very much alive. Not frozen in time, not sealed in glass. The jungle creeps closer each season. The stones crack, but the carving continues. Always has. Probably always will. You step back as the conservators pause. One pours a little water across the panel and wipes it with a soft leaf. The relief gleams for a moment, like wet ink just printed, then fades back to matte grey as the sun rises higher. You blink. You're no longer just looking at carvings. You're listening to a language without sound. You shuffle along a narrow stone ledge, trying not to trip over a root that's had centuries to decide exactly where it wants to be. Ahead, another gallery yawns open, its walls wrapped in low relief like parchment held up to the light. You run your fingers lightly along one of the figures, a slender arm, a looping braid, and wonder how did they get this precise, this delicate using tools that wouldn't impress a modern high school shop class. Turns out, the magic wasn't in the complexity of the tools, it was in their simplicity. Khmer carving tools were remarkably few and deeply loved. Each artisan had a personal kit, a few chisels of varying width, a smoothing stone, a curved hook for detailing curls and flames, maybe a simple wooden mallet. That's it. No bags of endless gadgets. No interchangeable heads. Just metal wood and a relationship built over time. You find a quiet nook and sit beside a low frieze of monkey warriors. Their fur is etched so fine you can almost hear them chattering. And here's a detail you didn't expect: the tools they used weren't only precious, they were peaceful. These weren't instruments of power or force. They weren't designed to dominate stone. They were shaped to listen to it. The carvers didn't stab the sandstone into submission. They coaxed it. The iron was soft, often locally smelted in small batches. That meant it dulled faster, sure, but it also meant the carvers had to work gently. You couldn't go full Thor on a panel or you'd ruin the line and your chisel. So instead, they developed a kind of respectful choreography with the surface. Tap, slide, brush, breathe. Modern researchers found microscopic evidence of these gentle passes in the surviving reliefs, shallow grooves where chisels skimmed more like dancers than drills. It's one of the reasons the carvings have lasted this long. There's less structural violence in them, just layer after careful layer. Here's a quirky little nugget for you. Some carvings show outlines that were never filled in, like sketches abandoned mid-thought. Historians still argue over why. Was it a change in artistic plan? A halted commission? A spiritual sign to leave it perfectly unfinished? Or maybe some carver just said, "You know what, it's break time," and never came back. Even in the 12th century, people ghosted projects. And if you think you're clumsy, take comfort in this many ancient Khmer chisels. Didn't even have handles. That's right, just bare iron wrapped in cloth or palm fiber. Which means every strike had to be cushioned by instinct and grip control. One slip, and you weren't just ruining a scene, you were carving an unscheduled nose onto Vishnu's thigh. As you walk further down the gallery, you start to notice something else: repetition. The tools, the poses, even some of the faces feel familiar. That's not laziness. That's tradition. These carvers weren't trying to reinvent their art every week. They were part of a lineage, a flow. When they carved apsaras, the celestial dancers, they followed strict proportions, 3 bends in the body, almond eyes, lotus hands. It wasn't just style, it was sacred geometry. That phrase, sacred geometry, might sound like a documentary. You fall asleep too, maybe even this one, but it was literal. Lines and curves iterated, cosmic principles, arms at right angles, anklets spaced evenly, each pose designed to evoke calm order, balance. Even when you couldn't read the story, you could feel its harmony. You spot a section where the stones crack clean through a warrior's spear. You crouch. Someone maybe just 50 years ago patched it with cement and good intentions. But the repair is clumsy loud. The spear tips a different color. Too bright. Too proud. It's a reminder that peaceful carving isn't just about tools, it's about tone. And that tone, it came from the carvers themselves. These weren't bitter laborers grinding out reliefs for coin. They were at least mostly devotees, spiritual artisans. Many worked in silence, offering each strike as prayer. Others hummed. There are accounts, rare but reliable, that some carving crews sang together, especially during repetitive border work. Garlands, scrolls, vines, like a chain gang, but with less chain and more serenity. A soft breeze drifts through the gallery now. It rustles the leaves of a fig tree overhead. You close your eyes for a second, and the breeze almost sounds like carving, like whispering metal, or maybe like time breathing through stone. You step through a narrow opening in the temple wall and find yourself in a courtyard, overrun with lichen, soft moss, and silence. A few dragonflies drift through a shaft of sunlight like tiny, confused helicopters. There's a stump nearby, flat ground clearly used, and you sit on it brushing away a leaf shaped like a sleeping frog. It smells of sandstone dust and something sweet, maybe frangipani, maybe just the heat. This is where you meet the apprentice. He's not here, of course, not literally, but you feel him. You feel you centuries ago, kneeling in this exact spot, clutching a too heavy chisel, trying not to drop it in front of your master. He watches you closely, not with disapproval, but with the quiet patience of someone who knows this will take years. Because it will. To become a master Khmer carver, you didn't just wake up one morning, grab a mallet and start chiseling elephants. You started young, really young. Some say as early as 7 or 8. Chosen from artisan families or temple-bound communities. The first lesson, how to sweep. Literally. You cleaned the carving spaces, fetched water, sharpened tools with a rock and a rhythm. Years passed before anyone let you touch a wall. And when you finally did, it wasn't some grand piece of religious iconography. It was probably a vine, or a toenail, or the corner of a skirt on a 7th row dancer. The masters gave you what they could afford to mess up. And yet, those little flourishes mattered. Every line carried spiritual weight. Even the tiniest curl could shift a god's expression from serene to smug. So, you learned slowly. Your first real carving probably took days, maybe a week. And when it was done, it was examined not just for symmetry, but for energy, the feeling it gave. Did the line breathe? Did it rest gently? Did it move like the wind? Historians still debate whether these apprentices lived on-site or traveled daily from their villages. Some argue for monastic apprenticeships, others for royal workshops. But all agree the system wasn't rigid. There were no ranks carved into stone. You learned by watching, doing, and being corrected gently or with a well-timed splash of coconut water to the back of the neck. You glance up and imagine your master looming over you now. He'd be old, of course, his grey braid, tight back eyes permanently squinting from decades in the sun. He doesn't scold. He just hums and walks away, trusting you fix the line yourself. And you will, eventually. There's a sweetness to the memory, and maybe a twinge of sadness too, because modern life doesn't train us like this. We are used to tutorials, 10-minute guides, skipping the boring bits. But here, boring was the bit. You carved the same pattern over and over until your hand stopped thinking. And slowly, so slowly you got good. Quirky tidbit. For this chapter, archaeologists once found a sandstone block with dozens of overlapping eye shapes carved into it, just eyes. Some believe it was a practice stone. Others say it was an offering or even an early template for facial expressions. One theory: it was just a bored apprentice waiting for his master to come back from lunch. You imagine sitting here, that block beside you, the jungle buzzing with heat. You carve an eye, then another, and another, each one better than the last. And somewhere deep in your bones, you realize this isn't just learning a craft. It's becoming someone new. That's what carving did to people. It changed them. It slowed their heartbeats. It trained their focus. It gave them a kind of sacred stillness that modern meditation apps can only dream of recreating. Some even say the best carvers became temple-bound souls, not monks exactly, but spiritually tethered to the stones they shape. They stopped speaking, stopped living, stopped wanting anything beyond the next clean curve of a god's earlobe. You stand now, brushing dust from your palms. The courtyard is quiet again, but the boy is still with you. You carry him forward through the galleries, through the centuries. His heartbeat is slower now, like yours, ready for the next line. You follow the sun as it climbs, casting long slashes of gold across the galleries. The walls come alive again, not just with gods and warriors, but with mathematics. It takes you a moment to notice, but once you do, you can't unsee it. Every swirl, every curve, every dancer's hip, every lotus bloom, none of it is random. It's all following some invisible order. This is where you encounter sacred geometry. Don't worry, there's no quiz, no compass or chalkboard equations. Just the quiet realization that everything in Khmer relief carving obeys a kind of visual gravity. Even chaos, battle, stampede storms is wrapped in symmetry and flow. You reach a wall thick with lotus motifs. They're arranged in concentric arcs, petals overlapping with fractal precision. Some are quartered, others in full bloom, each shape echoing a balance that feels almost inevitable. Like the stone wants to bloom this way. So how did the carvers plan this? Well, not with blueprints, that's for sure. Ancient Khmer artisans rarely left behind sketches or diagrams. Instead, they worked with grids, sometimes drawn in charcoal, other times etched faintly into the stone surface before carving began. Simple measurement systems were used: fingers, knotted cords, bamboo rods, and everything aligned with cosmic rules, directions, proportions, and cycles meant to please both the gods and the human eye. Here's your historical fact. For today, Angkor. What itself is aligned with the equinox. On those rare days, the sun rises directly behind its central tower, casting symmetrical shadows through doorways. Coincidence? Not likely. This was a civilization that measured eternity with shadows. You pause in front of a celestial dancer, an apsara, caught mid-turn. Her arms curve in that iconic triple bend pose, hands blooming like petals. She's not just pretty, she's a geometry lesson in motion. Khmer Carvers followed a canon of divine proportions handed down across generations. Apsaras had specific measurements for every feature: the curve of the waist, the tilt of the chin, even the distance between anklet beads. Deviate too far, and the figure might lose its spiritual charge. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about resonance. And yet, here comes the quirky bit. Some reliefs clearly break those rules. A few apsaras have asymmetrical eyes, extra fingers, or wildly unregulated earrings. Were these mistakes or rebellious flares? From overconfident artists, historians still argue whether these imperfections were errors, improvisations, or subtle nods to something deeper, like a deliberate reminder that only the gods are perfect. You trace your finger along one of these eccentric details, a spiraling earring that seems to twist just a bit too far, and suddenly you feel it. This wasn't an accident. It was joy. A moment of freedom slipped between lines of sacred mathematics, like doodling on the edge of a prayer book. The apprentices probably weren't allowed to freestyle, but the masters, they knew where they could bend the rules, and they knew when to sneak in a little humanity. There's something deeply comforting about that, because we often imagine these temples as solemn, rigid places. But these walls, they breathe, they flex, they wink, they carry the balance of heaven and the playfulness of earth. And when you step back, when you take in the whole frieze dancers twirling beneath garlands, gods smiling from pedestal, it doesn't feel like a formula. It feels like music. Some researchers believe the carvers use rhythms in their work, not just visual rhythms, but actual chant cycles to guide proportions and pacing. A long border might follow the beat of a devotional hymn, spacing every lotus according to the meter. It's not proven, but stand here long enough and you start to feel it too. You walk slowly along the gallery, now feeling the pulse of the wall beside you. It's not cold. Not really. The stone holds warmth from the sun like a loaf of bread just out of the oven. Your fingertips hum with every ridge, every groove, every deliberate notch. You wonder how long it took to finish just one of these scenes. A month, a year, a decade. Probably longer than any single carver's attention span. Which is why the rules mattered so much. They weren't just aesthetic guidelines, they were tools for continuity. One carver could stop mid-panel, and another could pick up weeks later, following the grid, the ratios, the rhythm. Like passing a melody to the next musician. You sit cross-legged beneath a frieze of dancing gods and let the patterns sink in. Your breath slows. The wall seems to shimmer in the heat. Not move, just shift, like it's thinking. And suddenly you realize this wasn't art made for humans to look at. It was made for time itself. You run your palm across a stretch of unfinished wall, just smooth sandstone, warm in the sun, waiting. No lines. No figures, just silence and potential. Then, as if on cue, a distant talk echoes through the gallery, followed by a faint whisper of chisels scraping stone. You follow it, not because you're lost, though you definitely are, but because the sound feels magnetic. And eventually, it leads you to a narrow corridor tucked behind a collapsed tower, where an old panel is being cleaned. A carving emerges from the wall slowly, like something waking from a dream. A soft cloth clears centuries of dust, and beneath it, you see a face, not a god or a warrior this time, but something simpler. A farmer maybe, one of the temple workers, barefoot grinning, holding a basket of mangoes. You smile, and then you feel it. The stone is whispering. Not literally, of course, but something in the texture, the gentle lines, the softness of the detail it pulls at your senses. There's a kind of intimacy in it, like the wall wants to talk. If only you'd listen long enough. And now, standing in this dim passage with the light trickling through cracks above you, realize something no history book ever quite explains. The stone speaks first. Khmer Carvers didn't just impose images onto sandstone. They collaborated. They consulted. Before a single line was drawn, the master would inspect the block run, his hand across the grain tab. It gently to hear the tone. Maybe splash a bit of water to see how it caught the light. If the block felt wrong, it wasn't used. Simple as that. You probably wouldn't think much of that. But to the carvers, each stone had a personality. Some were cooperative, some were moody, some held secrets too deep to touch. The stone dictated the flow. A softer grain. You could carve tighter spirals. A brittle seam. Better widen the god's belt to cover it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some temples contain half-finished figures that veer dramatically from the standard style. Arms shifted mid-motion, eyes recut. In several cases, You can even see the first version lightly carved beneath the final one. Historians still argue whether this was due to creative changes or whether the stone itself resisted the original design, demanding something else. A few ancient texts even suggest the stones were alive, not literally breathing, but spiritually charged, chosen, honored, sometimes offered incense before the first cut. You think of that mango farmer smiling gently, his entire face barely deeper than a fingernail edge, yet still here he is, centuries later, making you grin back. You walk deeper into the corridor now, noticing more of the stone's personality. Some walls ripple like water, others are almost waxy smooth. The colors shift subtly, grey to rose to soft butter yellow, all from the same quarries, all shaped with equal reverence. The best carvers could read a stone like a book. They'd know where to start, where to pause, where to hide the joints. Some say the apprentices had to sit in silence before carving, just breathing beside the slab, listening for how it wanted to be shaped. Again, not proven, but you kind of hope it's true. One thing we do know, sandstone from Mount Kulin, the sacred quarry site for most of Angkor's temples, was highly prized. It was fine-grained, soft enough to carve with precision, but hard enough to last centuries. The blocks were floated downriver, stacked on bamboo rafts and dragged for miles by elephants. And then, they waited. Sometimes, for years before carving even began. Just lying there, drying in the sun, acclimating to their new temple homes. Imagine that a stone taking a sabbatical before being shaped into immortality. Most of us don't even get that kind of onboarding. You crouch beside another figure, this one half buried in earth. Her hands are pressed in prayer. One eye is cracked through the middle, but the rest of her face remains serene. And for a moment, you get it. The calm, the patience, the respect between tool and texture. This wasn't violence, it was introduction. You imagine the carver's hand hesitating just above the surface, feeling the weight of the line he's about to draw, breathing once, twice, and then, the first tap. The stone accepts it. The carving begins. You brush away a leaf. The figure blinks in the dappled light. Or maybe it's just your imagination. Either way, you've heard her whisper. The sun is directly overhead now, draping sharp light across every lintel and stairwell. You follow a mossy path, flanked by tall, quiet walls, each one carved with stories stacked like verses of a forgotten poem. But something feels different here. You stop, lean your back against the warm stone, and look around. No guards. No overseers, no foremen barking orders, no slave drivers with whips, just stillness and shade, and the scent of roasted rice wafting from a hut beyond the temple's edge. This was no chaotic worksite. It was a calm collaboration, a place where dozens, maybe hundreds of artisans worked side by side, each knowing their role, each adding a breath to the same sacred mural. No shouting, no clock, just a rhythm of work shaped by sun sweat and occasional coconut breaks. Unlike the brutal labor camps of other ancient civilizations, yeah, Egypt, we're looking at you, the Khmer carving sites show little evidence of forced labor. There's no written record of punishment systems, no carvings glorifying cruel bosses, no mass graves of mistreated workers. Instead, you get something softer, gentler, cooperative. Historians still argue whether that peace came from royal benevolence or spiritual culture. Maybe both, but the carvings themselves tell the truth. You can't fake serenity in a line etched with devotion. And you don't get playful flourishes like a monkey scratching its butt mid-procession unless the carver felt safe enough to smile while working. You step around a corner and find a shady clearing beneath a tamarind tree. A few broken lintels form makeshift benches. You sit. This was probably a rest spot centuries ago too. The carvers would gather here between shifts trading betel leaves and mango slices, maybe complaining about yesterday's rain or tomorrow's batch of stubborn stone. Imagine it. One apprentice leans back and says, "That new sandstone slab feels like it has opinions." Another chuckles. "So do you." But nobody listens. Someone tosses a carved flower chip into a woven basket. The group nods. The carving continued. The tools they used weren't mass manufactured. Most were handmade, sometimes inherited. You didn't toss a chisel when it dulled, you sharpened it until it begged for retirement. And when it finally broke, you didn't trash it. You might bury it, offer it to the temple, or hang it quietly in a tree. That kind of respect trickled into every touch of the wall. And yet not everything was perfect harmony. There are spots where two scenes don't quite line up. One figure's arm seems off. A chariot wheel starts too high. These are the gentle collisions of a team project. Reminders that even sacred cooperation comes with a few oops moments.
But no one scraped it off. No one started over. Because peace doesn't mean flawlessness, it means forgiveness, even in stone.
A quirky detail. In some panels at Bantesre, under Khmer jewel, the carvings are so intricate, scholars believe women may have contributed directly to the work. There's no definitive proof, but the temple's nickname is the Citadel of Women, and some motifs there. Delicate eyebrows, flowing silk folds, elaborate hairpins suggest a different hand. Maybe more than one kind of master shaped these stories. The jungle rustles nearby, and a cicada shrieks like an uncooperative flute. You lean back, eyes half closed, and try to imagine the daily pace. It wasn't factory fast. It wasn't gig economy frantic. It was slow, steady, and quietly joyful. One historian compared Khmer Carvers to monks in motion. Not cloistered, not chanting in cells, but bringing that same stillness to their fingertips. When they carved a line, it wasn't to finish. It was to be present. You walk again this time, tracing a line of elephants carved along the gallery's lower half. They're plodding along dutifully, each one just slightly different ears, tilted tails, flicked one with what looks like a subtle smirk. These weren't just representations. They were relationships. The carvers knew these creatures, walked with them, respected them. And isn't that the core of peaceful creation? Familiarity without domination. Attention without ego. Hands moving because they want to, not because they're forced. You sit again, third time's the charm, and let your breathing sync with the imagined cadence of mallet on stone. Clink, pause. Clink, breathe. The smell hits you first. Earthy, sweet, unmistakably smoky. You follow it toward a sun-dappled courtyard, and there they are, 5 figures sitting cross-legged beneath a frangipani tree, bowls of rice in their laps, laughing like they haven't been chiseling divine elbows all morning. It's lunchtime, 12th century style. No cafeteria trays, no sad plastic forks, just banana leaves, warm rice, dried fish, pickled jackfruit, and yes, a few sticky betel leaves tucked behind ears for later. The tools rest nearby, carefully wrapped in cloth, not because anyone will steal them, but because you don't leave sacred things in the dirt. You settle onto a stone step at a respectful distance. One of the carvers leans back against the tree and sighs, the kind of sigh only earned after carving 30 straight feet of ornamental borders. Another flicks a bit of rice to a waiting chicken. The apprentice fans embers under a pot of tea, barely containing his excitement to share ghost stories again. Because oh yes, ghost stories were part of the job. Temples weren't just workspaces. They were spiritual superhighways, bursting with gods, spirits, ancestors, and the occasional hungry ghost who may or may not rearrange your carving tools while you sleep. One carving crew at Taprom was rumored to have stopped mid-project after a dream told the head mason that a jealous spirit didn't like how her face was being represented. Historians still argue whether these ghost accounts were literal or symbolic. Was the stone really haunted, or was it just cracking weirdly? Either way, the crew moved to a new wall and left the offended panel blank. Out of respect or caution, hard to say. You sip imaginary tea and watch the breeze play with the frangipani blossoms. This moment, the break, the shade, the food wasn't a distraction from the sacred work. It was part of it. Khmer carving culture embraced the rhythm of the day. Intense focus balanced by intentional rest. No rise and grind here. Just rise, chisel, nap, repeat. And don't be fooled into thinking they were all ascetic monks living on air and incense. Carvers had full lives, families, jokes, rivalries. Some even became low-key celebrities in their local villages for especially stunning panels. A few left subtle marks, tiny motifs, odd symbols, only recognizable to those who knew their signature. Kind of like tagging your work. In the most respectful, sacred way possible. A quirky detail. In one temple, a relief includes a chicken mid-strut beside a royal procession, totally out of place. Scholars suspect a carver just really liked chickens. Maybe he lost a bet. Maybe it was his favorite lunch. Either way, the chicken made the cut and has strutted proudly through history ever since. After the meal, the carvers don't rush back. One leans over and starts sketching shapes in the dust, with a stick testing a swirl pattern maybe, or daydreaming about a scene yet to be carved. Another lies flat arm over eyes, muttering about how Vishnu has too many arms to carve in this heat. The others chuckle. Even divine duties need naps. This pause in the day wasn't idleness. It was incubation. Letting the mind settle, letting the design mature in the body before it reappeared on the wall. You realize that some of the most intricate patterns you've admired probably started here in the dust in the shade between mouthfuls of rice. There's something humanizing about that. Sacred doesn't have to mean serious. Reverence doesn't exclude rest. In fact, the best carvers were those who knew when to step away. Let the stone breathe. Let the line wait. You watch the frangipani petals drift to the ground like lazy confetti. The tree leans ever so slightly to the south, maybe to avoid the sun, maybe because it likes this angle. Like everything here, it's grown into its place over time. And you feel like you've slowed a little too. Not because you're tired, because you're starting to understand what peace really looks like on a wall. It's not silence. It's rhythm. You return to the inner gallery as the shadows begin to lengthen, trailing your fingers across cool stone still warm from the midday sun. The path winds gently past columns carved like stalks of sugarcane, soft curves bending inward, guiding you toward one of the most sacred and theatrical tasks in Khmer art. You're about to carve the gods. No pressure. The wall you now face is filled top to bottom with divine figures. Vishnu with his discus, Shiva riding Nandi, Lakshmi scattering coins. You recognize the stories, or at least the poses. Arms arched gracefully, feet perched mid-step, heads haloed in lotus blooms or flaming crowns. And every single one of them carved not with fear, but with affection. Because that's the secret nobody tells you. Khmer gods weren't terrifying. They weren't thunderous, Zeus types hurling lightning bolts out of jealousy. These gods smiled. They danced. They leaned casually on mountain peaks or floated serenely through clouds like they were on vacation. Even the demons looked like they'd apologize if they bumped into you. You kneel before a nearly perfect relief of Vishnu reclining on the serpent Ananta and you swear he's smirking. Not maliciously, more like, yep, I've been chilling like this for 2 millennia. The way these figures were carved says everything about the mindset of the people who shaped them. There was reverence, yes, but not the kind that creates terror. The carvers weren't afraid of the divine. They were acquainted with it. Comfortable. Close. Historical fact. The most famous relief at Angkor, what spans over 6 feet, depicting the churning of the ocean of milk. A scene from Hindu cosmology where gods and demons literally team up to stir the ocean and extract the elixir of immortality. It features hundreds of figures, each carved with individual expressions, clothing folds and even toes. You stand before it now, dwarfed by its scale and tickled by its energy. No two characters are identical. Even the demons have flair. And here comes the quirky part. In one section of the churning, a giant turtle, the god, Vishnu, in animal form, is seen chilling under the mountain, being used as a churn stick. His expression mildly bemused, like he's thinking, "You're better not drop that." Scholars still debate whether this anthropomorphic humor was part of religious doctrine or just an artistic wink. Some argue it humanized the divine. Others say it reflected the artist's joyful worldview that enlightenment wasn't about solemnity but balance. Whatever the truth, it worked. Because these walls radiate a kind of warmth. Not in temperature, but in tone. And it wasn't just about looks. Carvers had to be symbolically accurate too. Each deity had prescribed poses, objects, and gestures. A misstep wasn't just a mistake, it could misrepresent the god's power. So, apprentices would study for years before being allowed to touch a divine figure. They practiced on vines, borders, even furniture carvings. Only once their lines carried grace, as one old poem puts it, were they permitted to start on a deity's ankle or crown. You walk along the gallery, spotting little quirks, a god with eyebrows lifted just enough to look like he's heard a juicy rumor. A goddess leaning ever so slightly forward as if she might step out of the stone entirely. These aren't static images. They move in their own way, not like cartoons, like memories. A gentle breeze trails through the columns and you close your eyes. For a moment, you imagine it, the carver sitting cross-legged on scaffolding, half his body covered in stone dust, squinting at a reference sketch drawn in charcoal. Below, his apprentice holds a pot of water to dab the line every few minutes. Behind them, someone is humming. Tap, slide, tap, breathe. One strike at a time, the god emerges, not summoned but revealed, as if he was always inside the wall, waiting for the right hands to set him free. You crouch beside a panel half swallowed by roots. A lotus blooms from the hand of a carved goddess. Despite the cracks, her fingers remain impossibly soft. You feel a strange kind of comfort, not awe, not fear, just familiarity. Because when the Khmer carved the gods, they weren't looking upward. They were looking inward. You round a corner and suddenly stop short. Before you stretches an entire wall of warfare. Horses rearing, spears flying, armies surging forward like ocean waves frozen mid-crash. But something's off. You step closer, squint. Why does this battle scene feel so calm? You expect rage, fury, bloodshed etched in stone. But instead, you see soldiers marching in rhythm, faces placid, even serene. Some are mid-action, losing arrows leaping into formation, but no one screams, no one bleeds. Even the enemy looks politely intense, like they're attending the world's most organized scuffle. And here's where it gets interesting. Unlike many ancient civilizations that carve war like a highlight reel of carnage, the Khmer had a different approach. Their violence was ceremonial. The battles were symbolic, epic. Yes, but more about balance and divine order than destruction. Each figure isn't just a soldier. It's a moving part of the universe being realigned. That's why, even in the middle of a battlefield, you find harmony. Your historical fact. One of the largest panels in Angkor, Tom's Bayon Temple, shows King Jayavarman VII's army in action. And guess what? It's not just war. It includes mid-march rest stops with soldiers cooking rice, sharpening tools, even brushing their teeth with twigs. Yes, Khmer Carvers immortalize hygiene in a military mural. That's balance for you. You smile, tracing the outline of a soldier calmly handing another a bowl. There's no urgency, just flow. And now, for your quirky tidbit. Near the center of one battle panel, there's a soldier with his back turned squatting, mid-relief, doing exactly what you think he's doing. Was it a prank? A joke from the artist? A message about the mundane reality of even the grandest wars? Historians still argue whether it was satire accident or a deeper comment on the cycle of human needs. But honestly, the carver probably just had a long day and thought, why not? You walk further, following the path of the relief. You notice that the warriors aren't differentiated by cruelty or aggression, but by discipline. Khmer soldiers are shown in formation shields, aligned horses decorated. Their enemies, often the mythical charm or other external forces, aren't monstrous, just different. There's no caricature, no demonization, just difference. That says a lot. Even when telling the story of war, the carvers chose understatement. Which makes you wonder, was this restraint artistic, political, spiritual? Some scholars believe these calm battle scenes reflected a Buddhist reinterpretation of older Hindu epics. After all, Jayavarman VII was a devout Mahayana Buddhist. He believed in the Bodhisattva ideal, the idea that enlightenment came not through escape, but through compassion and service. So, his wars weren't glorified for bloodshed, but for order, protection, harmony. It's said his favorite depiction was of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, carved with 11 heads and 1,000 arms, each hand open ready to help. No weapons, just gestures of peace. You pause before a panel where a general stands in profile, pointing toward a river. Below him, the carving shows boats crossing calm water, soldiers seated quietly, spears resting across their knees. No one yells, no one charges. It's a strategic lull, the breath between movements. And that's the genius of it. Khmer battle reliefs weren't about climax. They were about continuity, the flow of time, the balance of forces. War wasn't the point. It was the tension that led to clarity. You walk a little farther, reaching the edge of the scene. Here, a single fallen soldier lies at the feet of a divine figure. His eyes are closed, lips slightly parted. But again, no agony, just surrender. The kind that feels like acceptance. A breeze lifts your shirt as you turn away, brushing the dust from your fingers. The echoes of metal and muscle fade behind you. The relief doesn't glorify victory. It glorifies restoration. Because even battles in Khmer stone end in peace. As the afternoon deepens and the sun begins its long descent, a softer rhythm fills the air. You wander down a quieter passage, now one less grand, more human in scale. The carvings here feel gentler, less about kings and battles, more about motion, grace, repetition. And then you hear it, a soft hum, a whisper of tone more felt than heard. Not coming from your ears, but from inside the stone, or maybe from inside your chest. Either way, it feels ancient familiar. This is where the Khmer Carvers sang the walls awake. You stop beside a sequence of apsaras, celestial dancers, carved mid-step, hips, arched hands, turned like blossoms, caught in wind. each one different, each one singing in her own way. Now here's the historical scoop. Many Khmer artisans believed that carving wasn't just about shaping stone. It was about calling spirits into being. And to do that, they didn't just use their tools, they used their voices. Songs, chants, and melodic mantras were often sung as carving progressed. These weren't public performances. They were quiet, focused, meditative. The same phrase repeated hundreds, sometimes thousands of times, would align the mind with the motion of the hand. Line by line, the wall came alive. A few scholars even believe certain relief sequences followed chant structures, much like poetic meter. That rhythm you feel in your fingertips as you trace the wall, that's not coincidence. That's design. Harmony woven into each curve. And it wasn't just spiritual, it was practical. Carving in Cambodia's humid heat takes focus. Fatigue creeps in. But rhythm, vocal and physical, keeps you steady. Think of it like a metronome made of breath and intention. Every swing of the chisel ikiti with a syllable. Tap, om, tap, om. You hum a note now half shy and listen to how the sound bounces between the stone columns. It echoes back softened, not mockingly, almost supportively, like the temple approves. A quirky tidbit. Some carvings show figures mid-dance, but with their feet not touching the ground like they've just lifted off. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic of divine levitation or just a stylistic choice to show energy. Either way, it gives the impression that the wall don't just depict dancers, they become the dance. You pass one such dancer now. Her hands, impossibly delicate, frame her face like petals. Her eyes are half-lidded, lips curved in a smile you almost return. She's not frozen. She's paused, waiting for the next beat. And as you continue down the hall, you notice something else. Many of these reliefs repeat motifs. Dancers in similar poses, arranged like verses in a song. And just like verses, each is slightly varied. A different bracelet, a shifted gaze, a tilt of the head, enough to keep the rhythm flowing without becoming robotic. Imagine being the carver on verse number 83 of 120. You're tired, sweaty, the jungle's humming like a bad amplifier, and yet you sing, you hum, you etch that wrist just a little thinner, that chin just a bit higher. Because this is not a copy, it's a continuation. And the wall, it listens. One oral tradition claims that temples weren't considered truly awake until the dancers were carved, that the gods wouldn't reside there unless invited by motion. So, in a way, the carvers weren't just decorating, they were summoning, giving the stone a heartbeat. You reach a corner where the dancers taper off into spirals, their arms dissolving into floral scrolls. The chant ends. The rhythm fades, and for a moment, everything feels still. But not silent. Never silent. Because somewhere under the dust, under the centuries, under the stories you'll never fully know, the walls are still humming. You turn the corner, and it's like stepping into a royal daydream. The walls narrow slightly, focusing your attention inward, and there they are. Apsaras. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Dancers with impossible poise, lotus hands, bell-like anklets, and expressions that fall somewhere between mischief and divinity. Their hips sway in stone, their eyes glance sideways, their lips almost move. And for a second, you swear one of them blinked. You blink too, just to be sure. But she's still there, carved in relief perfectly. Still perfectly serene. And now, you get it. This wasn't just decoration. This was presence. Each figure a living offering. The Khmer Carvers gave these celestial women astonishing detail. Eyelids with double creases, fingernails shaped individually. Even the texture of their hair, coiled braided, lifted like cinnamon rolls. Atop their heads was rendered with precision. And the faces, they weren't copy-pasted. Each one is unique, expressive. Some shy, some confident. A few look like they've just told a really good joke. Historical fact. Scholars have catalogued over 1,700 different apsaras in Angkor Wat alone. Not one is exactly repeated. Some have names assigned centuries later. Others are simply waiting, watching, possibly judging your outfit. And here's the quirky tidbit among the dancers, you can occasionally spot something unusual. A fang peeking from a smile, an extra long earlobe, even the faint outline of a mustache. Yes, some figures appear androgynous, possibly even male apsaras or apsaroi, which has led scholars to debate whether these figures reflect mythology, gender fluidity, or simply an artist's idea of fun. Historians still argue whether these unique traits were intentional deviations or happy accidents carved into stone with a smirk. You crouch down and look closely at the feet of one dancer. The toes curl lightly, not rigidly. The anklet wraps at an angle, suggesting motion. And her dress, folded in 100 shallow grooves, ripples like it's caught in a permanent breeze. And all this from a flat wall. That's the magic of Khmer bas-relief. It gives dimension without depth, life without movement, emotion with the subtlest shift of line. You don't need animation, you just need a well-carved glance. The longer you stare, the more it feels like the wall is performing for you. Like you're being granted a private audience with a troupe that's been practicing for 900 years. But these weren't just dancers for show. In Khmer cosmology, apsaras were divine messengers, celestial beings who danced in the heavens to maintain cosmic harmony. They appeared in dreams, led heroes to their destinies, and occasionally meddled with mortals just for kicks. They were the bridge between the sensual and the sacred. And that duality shows up in the carving. The poses are graceful but grounded. The eyes are seductive but wise. The body is sensual but somehow untouched by human desire. They aren't for you. They simply are. And you're lucky to witness them. You walk farther, noticing how the apsaras are framed, columns on either side, floral arches above little birds tucked near their ankles. These weren't just background features. They were part of a visual garden. The entire wall becomes a sacred stage. And who were the carvers behind this divine choreography?
Not kings, not monks, not even priests. Just quiet artisans guided by tradition, intuition, and a deep understanding of form. They may never have seen a royal dance performance. Some may not have been literate, but they knew how to listen to movement and translate it into stone.
A rhythm in the breath, a flick in the wrist, a smile hidden in the corner of a mouth. You sit for a moment, letting the apsaras surround you. They say nothing, of course, but it doesn't feel like silence. It feels like they're still mid-dance, caught in a rhythm too slow for time to follow. A rhythm carved not just into stone, but into memory. And in this moment, between shadows, between centuries, you swear you feel your own heartbeat syncing with theirs. You wander through a sun-dappled passage where vines peek in through roofless edges and shadows stretch thin across the floor like sleepy cats. The carved figures become less grand here, less staged, like they've taken their crowns off and let their hair down for the evening. You pause beside a quiet panel of floral scrollwork. At first glance, it's just a decorative border. But then you lean in, really close, and there it is, a face, tiny, tucked into the swirl of a vine. No crown, no earrings, just a smirking little expression almost invisible unless you squint. And once you spot it, the rest start to reveal themselves. Eyes peeking from lotus blossoms, noses hiding in scrolls, full grins, curling between divine ankles.
Welcome to the secret faces.
These were the Easter eggs of Angkor, a subtle tradition of hiding anonymous portraits within the grand designs. They aren't documented in royal edicts. They aren't explained in temple inscriptions. They're just there, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and no two alike. Quirky. Tidbit of the day. One particularly odd face was found carved into a support beam inside Taprom. It has glasses. Round-rimmed, unmistakable glasses. Now, was it added centuries later? Probably. Was it done by some rogue conservator with a sense of humor? Almost definitely. But still, historians still argue whether this counts as vandalism or simply the latest chapter in a living wall's biography. You run your hand across another frieze, feeling the subtle imperfections. Not flaws, just flourishes. No ancient carver worked purely by formula. Every figure, every arch, every frame carries a bit of personal style. A ferret curl here, a thicker eyebrow there. Some even say you can identify certain carvers by how they shape fingernails. And here's the deeper truth. Most of these artists never signed their work. Unlike the stonemasons of Europe or the scroll painters of China, Khmer artisans didn't leave their names. They didn't chisel out. Created by Vishnu Kanta, year 1148. They blended into the wall like their hidden faces, present but anonymous.
Why?
Maybe it was humility, maybe spiritual philosophy, maybe they just weren't asked. But some researchers believe it was something deeper, the idea that the temple was the artist, not the individual. Each hand just carried the story forward for a time. Still, they found their ways to leave traces. A playful figure, an unexpected animal, a dancer with an extra curl in her braid. These little touches were their version of a wink. Their way of saying, I was here. You spot one now. A crocodile tucked under a boat in a military scene, but it's not hunting. It's sunbathing. Mouth open. Feet splayed out like it's on vacation. It doesn't match the tone of the battle around it, and that's the point. It doesn't need to. It's not part of the plot. It's part of the personality. And maybe that's what makes these carvings so enduring. Not just the skill, not just the mythology, but the humanity woven through it. These walls weren't made by perfect gods. They were made by imperfect people, people who snuck in jokes, who hid faces, who giggled while carving a horse's tail just a little too fluffy. You lean against a stone column, letting your eyes wander across the wall. It's beautiful, sure, but also funny, warm, almost familiar. Like an inside joke you weren't supposed to get, but somehow do. And in a world of formal temples and rigid doctrine that matters. Because peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of playfulness, of creativity without fear, of walls that not only teach you something sacred, but remind you how to smile. You give a nod to one of the hidden faces, this one tucked into a tree root, half erased by time, but still very much grinning. Nice work, you whisper. The face says nothing, of course.
But somehow you're sure it hurt you.
The sky is shifting now, softer, deeper, bluer. You emerge from the passage of hidden faces and find yourself in an open courtyard, just as the sun begins to set. The air smells like old stone and damp leaves. Somewhere nearby, a frog starts singing like it thinks it's famous. And in this twilight hush, you do something you haven't yet done.
You come back to the carvings at night.
Or almost night. The golden hour is casting long shadows across the walls, and suddenly, every groove, every chisel line, every delicate swirl of a dancer's braid feels amplified. You've walked past these same panels earlier in the day, but now they seem to shift, stretch, whisper. This is the secret the guidebooks don't tell you. Khmer reliefs transform in moonlight. Not physically, of course, but optically. What looked shallow becomes deep. What seemed flat now feels sculptural. The shadows fill the space between lines and the figures. Gods, dancers, soldiers, even chickens begin to glow from within. You crouch by a low wall near the edge of the courtyard. It shows a scene from a procession, maybe royal, maybe ritual. Torches being carried, parasols, unfurled oxen plodding forward with that same calm dignity found in all Khmer beasts. But now, in this light, the torches carved into the stone seem to flicker. The parasols bend slightly more in the imagined breeze. And just like that, the past becomes motion. Historians still argue whether these night effects were intentional or simply a happy byproduct of good craftsmanship. Some suggest the architects oriented key walls toward the setting sun on purpose. Others claim the shifting light was used during rituals, the glow from real fire interacting with stone stories to create an immersive experience before projectors were even a twinkle in electricity's eye. But you don't need a theory. You can feel it. The wall is alive. Here's your quirky moment. In one nighttime carving inspection at Angkor. What in the 1980s? A group of researchers found that one figure, previously unnoticed in harsh daylight, only became visible when backlit by a flashlight. It was a small kneeling figure under a lotus blossom, almost like it was meant to be discovered by moonlight alone. You walk slowly along another gallery. Now hands clasped behind your back, like someone in a museum but barefoot and slightly more mosquito bitten. The carvings shift as you move. One goddess turns her head ever so slightly. A deer raises its nose. Even a charioteer looks like he's just decided which way to go. You're not hallucinating. You're witnessing optical rhythm, a technique in Khmer art, where patterns are repeated in such a way that the light completes the illusion. Even minor curves in the stone catch dust, differently animating a story that's otherwise frozen. It's not magic, it's mastery. You pause beside a wall depicting the arrival of divine envoys. Hands raised, gifts offered, figures bowing with grace and intent. The entire scene under softening sky feels like it's still happening. Like they've just arrived and you're late to the ceremony. And in that moment, you realize something. The Khmer didn't build temples to be seen in daylight alone. They built them for eternity's whole clock. Sunrise, midday, sunset, moonlight. Different faces of the same wall. Different emotions carved into the stone's shifting skin. You lie down for a moment right there on a warm patch of stone. Above you, the silhouettes of towers rise against a darkening sky. A few bats begin their nightly patrol. Somewhere far off, a flute plays, or maybe it's a bird finishing its shift. And as night creeps in, the carvings begin to fade. Again, not disappear, just descend back into the walls, back into memory. You close your eyes, not to sleep just yet, but to let the scene rest. Because like the Carvers, you now understand, stories don't end. They settle, until someone shines the right light again. You rise slowly, your joints offering a quiet protest, and dust yourself off. The air is cooler, now thick with the scent of damp stone and distant campfires. Fireflies blink near the tree line like confused spirits trying to find the exit. You wander back inside, into a quieter corridor, guided by fading light and the occasional glint of mica embedded in the sandstone. And then you see it, a lion, carved boldly at the base of a stairwell, muscles tense, teeth bared mane flaring out like a temple flame. It should be majestic, it should be terrifying. But instead, it looks like it's mid-sneeze. You crouch down, squinting. The eyes are squinted shut, the nostrils flared and the tongue just peeking out. Like the lion was seconds away from a divine roar and someone said, "Pepper." You stifle a laugh. And then another louder chuckle escapes because next to the lion is a monkey riding what might be a duck. It's hard to tell, but it's definitely not serious, and it's definitely carved on purpose. This is the master's joke. Somewhere along the way, after years, maybe decades of carving borders, dances and scenes from holy epics, the carvers had some fun. Because sacred doesn't mean stiff. Reverence can wear a grin. And these artisans knew how to hide humor like gold leaf under layers of ash. Quirky detail time. At the base of one Angkorean staircase, archaeologists found a frieze showing a line of soldiers, and one figure bent over with his trousers conspicuously low. No clear reason, no myth to explain it. Just a guy mid-moon. Historians still argue whether this was vandalism, social commentary, or just a 12th century punchline. You walk deeper into the hallway, noticing more of these playful touches. A squirrel holding what looks like a mango. A celestial dancer whose belt is tied in a bow just a little too large. A crocodile making direct eye contact with the viewer expression best described as suspiciously self-aware. Were these jokes or expressions of individuality? Perhaps both. Because in a world where most workers go nameless, humor becomes signature. And when your medium is stone, your only hope of being remembered is through style. So, if you've carved 300 elephants, maybe the 300 first one wings. There's a warmth in that realization. These walls aren't just a gallery. They're a conversation between the past and now, between the carver and you. A kind of centuries-old inside joke passed through moss rain and generations of lichen. You pause before a dancer panel. Her pose is perfect, but look closer and you see one eye is just slightly crossed. It doesn't ruin the figure. If anything, it makes her more real. Less divinity, more diva.
One old tale says that master carvers were expected to carve one deliberate imperfection into their work. Not because they lacked skill, but because perfection was reserved for the gods. You didn't steal the divine spotlight, you bowed to it.
Maybe that sneezing lion, a tribute to that philosophy. A reminder not to take even sacred duties too seriously. You sit against the opposite wall now, facing the carved parade of mischievous stone. The light's almost gone. The hallway's cooler. Somewhere a gecko chirps from high above his own tiny temple song. And you smile.
Because this is the part of the temple no one talks about on tours. Not the grandeur, not the scale, but the personality. The invisible fingerprints left behind not just in the lines but in the laughter. You close your eyes again, imagining the carvers pausing after finishing a serious section. One nudges the other. What if the lion had allergies?
The other shrugs. Only if the duck gets a crown. They laugh, they carve, and they leave behind the kind of legacy no history book can fully explain. Not a monument, a wink. You rise with a creak of stone and knees and find yourself drawn toward one of the most mind-bending mysteries of Khmer architecture. Not the carvings this time, but the structures themselves. The grand galleries, sky-kissing towers, corridors aligned like piano keys struck by light. The temples of Angkor rise with such precision, such quiet genius, you begin to wonder, how are they still standing? You walk along a high platform where the walls stretch without a drop of mortar, and that's when it hits you. These temples were built like puzzles. Massive, perfectly cut blocks of sandstone, some weighing up to 1,500 kilograms stacked like heavenly Lego. No cement, no nails, just physics, patience, and an almost spiritual commitment to getting the joints just right. You press your palm to one of the seams. The edge is so tight, so clean, it could be mistaken for a modern machining. But this was done with chisels, levels made from string and water, and a terrifyingly good eye for alignment. Historical fact: Khmer builders used an interlocking system of taps, grooves, and tongue and slot joints to make their temples not only strong but flexible. Flexible enough to endure earthquakes, floods, even the slow, quiet rage of tree roots. Imagine carving stone blocks that big, that precise in the jungle. No bulldozers, no laser levels, just a team of elephants' ramps made of dirt and the kind of collaborative trust that can only come from generations of working together. And the best part, most of the weight is downward. Gravity is the secret ingredient. Once placed, the stones settle into each other, tighter over time, like the temple is hugging itself into eternity. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In Takeo, a temple mountain near Angkor, a series of lintels were installed so tightly, a modern conservation team couldn't remove them without breaking tools. One conservationist famously gave up mid-restoration and said, "The stone doesn't want to move." And honestly, I don't blame it. You walk along the wall now, noticing the joints. They aren't always straight. Sometimes they follow the natural grain of the sandstone curved ever so slightly. It's as if the carvers didn't force the design, they listened to what the rock wanted. In places, the seams are nearly invisible. In others, they emphasize part of the aesthetic. You spot a spot where the stones have shifted, just a touch, making a divine figure's feet look like they're mid-step. Was it deliberate or just clever luck? Historians still argue whether Khmer builders planned for movement or simply built so well the temples evolved into balance. You stop at a stairway that ascends so steeply it feels more like a ladder. This was intentional too. The steepness was meant to symbolize the difficulty of reaching the divine. And as you climb one slow step at a time, you realize they made you work for wonder. At the summit, the view is quiet. The jungle stretches to the horizon, green and endless. You can see the symmetry now, the way each temple axis mirrors the heavens. Some align with solstices, others with stars. These weren't buildings. They were calendars you could walk through. You think of the builders again, not just the carvers, but the planners, the stone haulers, the layout artists with bamboo poles and chalked strings. They worked in teams that stretched across time. Fathers taught sons. Uncles mentored nephews. Friends passed along secret tricks about which stone sings when you tap it and which one hides a crack under the surface.
And none of them signed their work. None.
They didn't need to. The temples were the signature. The stones fit so well that even centuries of monsoons, colonizers, tree invasions, and bad colonies couldn't tear them apart.
The joints held. The puzzle stayed whole.
You run your fingers along the seam between two blocks perfectly flush after 9 centuries. Not an ounce of glue, just trust. You smile.
Because it's one thing to carve beauty into stone. It's another thing entirely to make that beauty last.
You descend the steep stairs. Slowly, your hand gliding over the smooth stone rail. As jungle sounds start to return. Birds gossiping in the canopy. Insects tuning their legs like string instruments. A distant rustle that may or may not be a monkey plotting something unwise. At the foot of the stairs, you stop.
Because there's dust.
Not the usual soft film of age you've grown used to. This is heavier, looser, like it's freshly settled. A thin blanket of powdered sandstone clings to the ledges, the corners, the soles of your feet. You kneel down and scoop some into your palm.
It crumbles like warm flour. Dry, fine, ancient. This is what happens when time exhales.
The carvers knew this dust intimately. It was a byproduct of their art of every tap and scrape. But they didn't see it as waste. They saw it as evidence. Proof that the stone had given something up. That it was yielding gently, becoming. You stand brushing your hands on your shirt. The dust clings. You look around and realize the reliefs themselves are slightly softened. Their edges worn, not erased, just aged. Some figures are more ghost than God now. Their outlines are faint, their fingers blunted.
But somehow this makes them more powerful because they've endured.
Historical fact: sandstone is a porous, weather-sensitive material. Over centuries, tropical rain moss, wind and heat cause slow erosion. The average relief loses a few millimeters every 100 years. Multiply that by 900 and yeah, some apsaras are missing their noses. But remarkably, most of them are still recognizable. Still smiling, still dancing. And here's your quirky detail. A few years ago, during a restoration effort at Bafuan Temple, a conservator found tiny footprints in the dust of an upper corridor. Not human. Lizard. A single gecko had scampered through the scaffolding, pausing here and there. The prints were pristine little starburst toes preserved in ancient powder. A millennia-old wall. And a 5-minute-old memory. You walk now through a gallery open to the sky. Leaves drift down like lazy confetti. The light dances across the dust, creating momentary shadows that mimic the carvings. A god's arm appears and disappears as a cloud shifts. A dancer flickers to life, then vanishes. And you realize this dust isn't just a byproduct. It's a reminder of impermanence, of change, of the fact that even the hardest materials given time and wind and rain will yield. And the Carvers knew it. They didn't expect their work to last forever. They didn't fight decay. Instead, they carved with the knowledge that one day, far beyond their lifetimes, their lines would blur, their gods would fade, and the walls would speak more softly. Some even embraced it. In older sections of the temples, you'll find carvings stuck under eaves hidden behind pillars, protected spots meant to last longer, while more prominent reliefs were left to the mercy of time. A kind of planned fading, like giving memory different lifespans. Historians still argue whether this was intentional architectural wisdom or just luck and happenstance. But you know better. You've seen too many of these quiet decisions, these little signs of foresight. You come to a platform now where the dust is thickest. You sit cross-legged and watch as a breeze lifts the powder in swirling delicate spirals. The particles catch the light. For a moment, they look like smoke, or incense, or breath. You think of a carver centuries ago pausing mid-panel. He wipes his forehead. He taps his chisel clean. He watches the dust drift away from his latest line. He knows that line may not last forever. But he also knows right now it is perfect. And that's enough. You exhale slowly, letting the moment settle. The dust falls around you in slow motion flurries, not erasing, just softening. Just like memory. You wander further down the corridor, your sandals whispering across the sandstone floor, and your mind still tracing the drifting dust. Around you, the carvings swell once more, larger, denser, more theatrical. It's as if the wall is clearing its throat for something grand. And then you see it. A cluster of divine figures standing at odd angles, their limbs coiled in motion, their eyes oddly intense. One of them, Vishnu, unmistakable, is captured mid-turn, his elbow jutting outward at a strangely mechanical angle. You blink, step closer. That elbow is awkward, not broken, not badly carved, just off. Too high, too sharp, like it was moved mid-pose. You tilt your head, then the other way. It doesn't help. If anything, it makes the whole figure feel like a divinity who slept wrong and hasn't quite worked it out. And you're not alone, because welcome to one of the longest running scholarly debates in Khmer art. What's up with Vishnu's elbow? Historians still argue whether this bizarre bit of anatomy is a stylistic choice, a botched repair, a symbolic exaggeration, or some kind of ancient optical illusion that just didn't age well. Some say it reflects multiple artists' hands. Others, blame changes in political or spiritual direction midway through carving. One theory even suggests the stone block shifted slightly after installation, throwing off proportions. But the truth is, we may never know. And that's kind of perfect. Because the mystery isn't a flaw, it's an invitation. A reminder that even sacred art can be weird, that gods too can have awkward angles, and that beauty doesn't always mean symmetry. You scan the rest of the wall. Other poses pop out now. Arms too long. Ankles turned like ballet mishaps. A foot that looks more like a papaya than a human extremity. And yet, each figure still radiates grace. The imperfections don't detract. They humanize. Here's your quirky tidbit. In a few temples, some figures were clearly recarved. You can see earlier lines beneath final ones. One particularly famous case at Prayakan shows a god with two noses, the first faintly chiseled, beneath the second, like someone tried a redo and forgot to erase the draft. Some scholars think these were artistic corrections. Others believe they were part of evolving iconography, spiritual revisions if you will. And the longer you look, the more you realize Khmer carvers weren't afraid of change. They weren't trapped by perfection. Their work was flexible, responsive, organic. Carving wasn't a frozen process, it was alive. You step back and look at the wall from a distance. The odd elbow disappears. The strange foot blends into the scene. The god returns to divinity. Just like that, the error becomes part of the whole. And isn't that the lesson? We focus on details, on the misplaced hand, the tilted eye, but the carvers were always thinking big. Whole panels, whole stories, whole temples. Each part only makes sense when you step back far enough to see its place in the pattern. You touch the edge of a column, now tracing a line that curves just a little too quickly before settling back into perfect symmetry. Intentional mistake. A brief sneeze during carving. Does it matter? Because in this place, even the awkward becomes sacred. A sudden gust of warm air rushes through the corridor, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the far-off hush of water stirring. You pause and glance up.
The skies shifted again.
Clouds have gathered low and bruised with rain. The air feels electric, not charged in a dangerous way, but like it's waiting for something. Then with a soft crack, the sky splits. The monsoon arrives. Rain falls suddenly heavily, like a forgotten drumbeat returning. The carved walls begin to glisten. Tiny rivulets run down centuries-old scenes, softening edges, darkening grooves. What was once warm gold now becomes shimmering charcoal. The stone drinks it in. You step under a partial roof, but the temple offers little shelter. That's not a flaw, it's design. Khmer architects planned for the rain. They knew it would come, and in fact, they used it. Temples were built to absorb water as much as resist it. Historical fact. Angkor Wat's moat isn't just decorative, it's part of an elaborate hydraulic engineering system. Channels, reservoirs and moats work together to manage floods, irrigate rice, and even stabilize the foundations of massive stone temples. The temples literally float on water-balanced sand and clay beds, preventing sinkage and collapse. You reach out and catch a drop on your palm. The air cools instantly. Around you, the jungle rejoices, leaves tremble, moss darkens, the smell of everything doubles in richness. But the carvings, they change. A scene you passed earlier, now wet with rain, has revealed a second layer. A thin line beneath a god's arm, previously invisible, now shines faintly. It's a different carving, fainter, older. And that's when you realize rain doesn't just clean the walls. Sometimes it uncovers them.
At various temples, archaeologists have documented cases where monsoons reveal earlier carvings beneath newer ones. It's like the stone remembered a past life and water gave it permission to whisper.
Some scholars believe this was a common practice. Older reliefs were gently shaved down and recarved during regime changes, theological shifts, or repairs. Others think these phantom lines are false starts, early drafts, or even unfinished sketches lost to time. Historians still argue whether these ghost carvings were intentional palimpsests or accidental survivals. Either way, they are stunning. You crouch in the wet and study the scene more closely. One figure appears to be holding a staff in the newer carving, but underneath faintly he held a lotus. Same pose, different purpose, different message. It makes you wonder how many stories were rewritten here. Not with pen or ink, but with chisel and time. And here's your quirky tidbit. In one temple, a relief of a dancing apsara was found with 3 sets of hands, layered ghostly like a flipbook mid-turn. Some believe it represents movement, an early Khmer attempt at dynamic art. Others think it's simply a redo. But in the rain, all 3 sets shimmer as though she's dancing again. You lean against a damp column, watching rain beat across a god's forehead. The droplets make him look like he's sweating. Maybe from battle, maybe from laughter, maybe from the sheer absurdity of lasting this long. Because that's what this rain is telling you. Nothing is finished. The carvings, the stories, even the stone itself, they're all still becoming. The monsoon doesn't destroy. It reveals. It erodes just enough to uncover the deeper truth. You close your eyes and let the rain patter against your skin. You breathe in water dust memory. The scent of it all wraps around you like a warm cloth. And in this soaked moment, you feel connected not just to the carvers or the gods, but to the process itself. The idea that nothing here is ever static, not even stone. The rain softens again. Just a mist now. The figures gleam. And you walk on damp but peaceful. Because sometimes the only way to see clearly is to let the story get wet. The rain dwindles to a whisper, then a memory. Leaves drip steadily. Puddles form in shallow stone indentations, reflecting upside-down gods and dancers, until your footstep sends them rippling into abstraction. The scent of rain on warm stone, sharp, earthy, electric, clings to the back of your throat. But the air feels different now. You step carefully over a vine-thick crack in the floor, its roots slowly invading what used to be a perfect gallery, and suddenly the carvings shift in tone. They're still beautiful, still deliberate, but the lines feel heavier now. Shadows linger longer in the grooves. The stone is darker, the faces more guarded. Because this is a temple in transition. This is what happens when carving continues under siege. Even during war, even after kings fell and cities shifted, the artisans kept working, or tried to. The Khmer Empire didn't vanish overnight, but as power fractured and borders blurred, you can almost sense the difference in the chisel marks. They're faster in places, cruder, not sloppy, just tired, rushed, or maybe just stretched thin. Historical fact: after the golden age of Angkor, several temples were still under construction, or even just beginning during times of intense political instability. Jayavarman VIII reversed his predecessor's Buddhist policies and ordered many Buddhist images defaced or replaced. At the same time, some Hindu temples were abandoned mid-project as regional kingdoms began to rise in rebellion. You crouch near a Buddha whose face is strangely worn, not by time, but by human hands. The mouth is chiseled away, the eyes faintly scratched. This wasn't weather. This was intention. And here's the odd part. Next to the damaged figure is a brand new carving. Different style, different mood. A Hindu god in place of a Buddhist one. Clean lines, fresh stone dust, still clinging inside the grooves. One belief overwritten by another. Piece replaced then resketched. Historians still argue whether this was religious zealotry or state-mandated transition. Some say it was political posturing temples used as propaganda. Others argue it was simply adaptive reuse. Stone was valuable. Why waste it?
But the tension that stayed.
You walk deeper into this part of the complex and everything feels off axis. Some walls are unfinished. Some columns only half carved. One lintel lies broken on the ground, its scene split clean in two. The figures depicted there, a divine bird, carrying Vishnu, seem caught mid-flight, never to land. And then you find it,
A wall that was never carved.
completely flat, perfectly prepped but blank. No outline, no grid, just smooth stone waiting for centuries. You run your fingers across it. There's something haunting here, not because it's empty, but because it was supposed to be full. The carvers were ready. The stone was ready. But something stopped them. War, famine, politics. Maybe they were simply told to go home and never returned. You sit on the stone floor, facing the blank wall. The rain has passed. The wind carries the sound of frogs chirping in distant pools. And you feel it again, that ache of the unfinished. That reminder that even sacred work can be left behind. And yet somehow, this blank wall is as powerful as the finished ones. Because it reminds you that the act of carving wasn't just about product. It was about persistence. Even in collapse, even under siege, even when gods were changing and borders dissolving, the carvers picked up their tools and tried. One chisel mark at a time. One breath time did. A quirky detail. At Bengmelea, a temple overrun by jungle, there's a section where carvers appear to have been in the middle of switching styles. Hindu iconography on one side, Mahayana Buddhist imagery just beginning on the other. It's like watching a thought process unfold mid-wall, a temple caught mid-sentence. And here you are, centuries later, listening to that unfinished sentence. You stand slowly, brush stone dust from your palms, and glance once more at the empty wall. It doesn't speak, but it doesn't need to. You've heard the silence, and now you carry it with you. The temple narrows again. Walls draw close like a throat preparing to speak. You walk through brushing under vines that reach down like lazy fingers. The carvings here shift subtle at first, then unmistakable. A lotus design that looks not quite right. A warrior's armor in a style that doesn't match the others. A smile that feels oddly foreign. And then you realize what's happening. You found the echoes of other temples. These carvings aren't mistakes. They're borrowed. Echoes from other traditions, other kingdoms. Indian, Cham, Javanese, even early Thai. The Khmer weren't carving in isolation. They were absorbing ideas, adapting, blending, perfecting. You crouch beside a panel of Garuda, part man, part bird wings spread. The posture is distinctly Indian, almost textbook Gupta-era iconography. But the face, the jewelry, pure Khmer flair. It's not imitation, it's transformation. Historical fact. Many of Angkor's design motifs and myths were imported from Indian epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, brought by traders, priests, and early political emissaries. But the Khmer took those stories and gave them local weight, literally grounding them in stone, in soil, in silence. You walk on, and more borrowed flourishes reveal themselves. A floral border straight from Sri Lanka, a demon's face with Batak features, a roofline technique whispered in from Java. But what's remarkable is how seamless it all feels. This isn't theft, it's fusion. The Khmer weren't copying, they were collaborating across time and space. They saw ideas as building blocks, not boundaries. They carved what resonated. They made it their own. Here's your quirky tidbit at Banti Esre. A smaller but insanely detailed temple, Northeast of Angkor, scholars found carvings so refined and stylized that some believe the original design came from palm leaf manuscripts imported from South India. Carvers may have interpreted drawings, adapted them to local symbolism, and then exaggerated details in stone, like taking a sketch and turning it into sculpture. And the result? A wall that sings in multiple dialects of myth. You pause at a relief of Hanuman the monkey god, leaping across the ocean. But instead of soaring through clouds, he's bounding over rice paddies carved with exacting lines. A local twist. Familiar landscapes for local eyes. Historians still argue whether this localization was state-mandated storytelling or artisan-level interpretation. Some say the carvers had creative license to adapt epics for Khmer audiences. Others believe they followed strict templates, the truth. Probably somewhere in the middle, like all great collaborations. You walk past a panel that begins in one style and ends in another. The left side features rigid stacked composition. The right flows more organically, vines curling like they're alive. It's like watching art evolve mid-wall. You can almost hear the carvers discussing, "Too stiff, let's loosen it." But the model says, "Yes, and now we say something better." You smile. Because this is how cultures move forward. Not by clinging to purity, but by mixing. By carving the old stories with new hands. By turning echoes into music. You rest a moment beneath an overhang, eyes scanning a dance frieze where the poses feel different. Not Indian, not Khmer. Something in between. The steps unfamiliar, but the joy unmistakable. A celebration in a borrowed rhythm made permanent in stone. And in that moment, you understand something deeper.
This temple, like all great works, was never meant to be static. It was porous, breathing in influence, exhaling innovation. Every borrowed detail carved with care, every echo an invitation.
To belong, to evolve, to last. You pass beneath a low arch where roots cling like sleeping serpents, and the path opens into a narrow gallery. The reliefs here are simple, repetitive. Dozens of serene faces, each turned to the same side. Profile after profile left, 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 left. You squint, pause, step back, and there it is, the pattern. Every single face on this wall is looking left. Not left, from your point of view, mind you, but their own left stage, left, spiritual, left, eternal, left, on a mission. The uniformity is uncanny. 100 calm expressions, all gazing in the same direction like an audience that saw something 1,000 years ago and never looked away. And now, the question crawls into your mind. Why do Khmer faces always look left? You pace along the gallery, noting it again. The gods in chariots, left. The celestial dancers, left. The soldiers, the farmers, the boatmen on their tiny stone barges, left, left, left. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Historians still argue whether this was a matter of ritual symbolism or logistical convenience. Some say it had to do with the viewer's journey. The narrative of the reliefs was designed to be read in a clockwise direction, meaning left-facing figures always move with you. Others suggest it had something to do with auspicious directionality. In certain traditions, the left side from the figure's perspective represents rebirth, purity, or the path toward liberation. A few scholars, notably less poetic, point out the simplest reason right-handed carvers found it easier to chisel profiles facing left. You can carve a nose, eye, and mouth in one clean flow when it faces a certain way. It's ergonomic, practical, efficient. You trace a line of identical noses, now sharp, proud, subtly hooked at the tip. Maybe the real answer is all three spiritual tradition, visual rhythm, and wrist-friendly ergonomics coming together in a kind of cosmic choreography. Quirky detail. At least one relief at Bayon Temple features a single face among hundreds that looks right just one. Not prominent, not explained. Was it a mistake? A secret signature? A rebellious apprentice who wanted his profile to stand out? No one knows, but once you see it, it haunts you. You try to spot it now, scanning the walls for that lone rebel, but not here. This gallery remains obedient. Every eye on this side is turned with unbreakable composure, like they were told something once and have been contemplating it ever since. The repetition isn't boring, it's hypnotic, like a chant carved in flesh. The more you stare, the more it feels like the wall is moving, like the faces are sliding forward in a single procession, each profile a syllable in an eternal sentence. And that sentence, it might say, look, that way, always that way. There's something comforting in that. The clarity, the order, the harmony of direction. These were walls carved for people who believed in alignment of body, breath, cosmos. Everything has its place, its pose, its preferred orientation. You stand still and let your own face drift left. You match them. For a moment, you become one of the carve. You imagine your nose, your mouth, your cheekbone added to the lineup, patiently staring out into the same infinite left. And it's not mindless conformity. It's collective meditation. Each profile is distinct. Some youthful, some wrinkled, some soft, some strong. But they're all part of something bigger. A great alignment. You step back into the center of the gallery and glance down a corridor that breaks the pattern spirals instead of faces, plants instead of people. The shift feels jarring now, like switching from a steady drum beat to a new melody. And maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the power of a wall isn't in its decoration, but in its direction. You step into a quieter chamber. Now it's ceiling low, its carvings modest, almost plain. No gods, no chariots, no processions of left-facing dancers this time. Just a single frieze, repeating the same image over and over. Hands pressed in prayer, hands offering fruit, hands lifting lotus blossoms, hands holding tools. But there are no names here. No carved signatures, just the hands that never sign. You sit down on a worn stone ledge and feel it again, that hush, that soft pressure in the air. This is not a room of grandeur. It's a room of gratitude. A space for the ones who shaped the temples and then stepped away, who made beauty and never claimed it. Historical fact. Khmer inscriptions mention kings, priests, donors, even dancers and gardeners. But very few ever name the carvers, the artists, the laborers, the ones whose fingers brought the stone to life. They weren't forgotten out of cruelty, just folded into the collective, seen as part of a divine order. The temple was the offering, not the ego behind it. Still, you can feel them here. Not in the writing, in the touch. Every groove carved, every face shaped, every fold in a dancer's skirt, all left behind by hands that didn't need applause. Just purpose, presence, maybe peace. You trail your fingers across the wall. It's different from the more famous galleries. Simpler. Maybe it was a training wall, or a finishing chamber, or just a place where apprentices practice prayers instead of patterns. And here's your quirky detail. At least one unfinished column at Angkor shows random doodles, tiny lotus buds, interlocking loops, even a crude fish. Scholars think these might have been carved by trainees warming up their hands before starting real work, like a medieval sketchbook, but in stone. You like that idea? You like the thought of someone barefoot, dusty, maybe barely 16, etching a little fish into the base of a pillar, not because it mattered, but because their hand needed to remember how to move.
And now you're thinking about your own hands. How often they scroll, tap, click, swipe. But when was the last time they crafted something not typed, not ordered, not assembled, created slowly, repeatedly, without needing it to go viral, without even needing it to last?
Because these carvers, they worked for eternity, yes, but they also worked for now. Each line carved in the moment, each breath guiding the next strike. They weren't thinking about legacy. They were thinking about getting this vine just right. You look up at the wall again. The hands are still there. Quiet. Steady. No name attached. No bio link. No watermark. And still, they speak. They say, this was made with care. This was made with stillness. This was made by someone who showed up. You exhale deeper than you expected. Your shoulders drop. Your fingers twitch a little as if they want to remember something too. Because maybe the true temple isn't the building. Maybe it's what your hands do when no one's watching. The path takes one last turn through a vine-choked doorway where stone gives way to silence. The carvings here are sparse, spaced farther apart, as if even the walls needed time to breathe. You move slowly now, not because you're tired, but because the air itself seems to demand it. There's a long wall ahead, and from a distance it looks blank. But as you draw near, the carvings emerge light and subtle, shallow as a breath. A quiet parade of nature birds, mid-flight curling vines, frogs poised to leap. A deer tucks its legs beneath a tree. A single leaf curls like it's listening. This isn't a story, it's a stillness. You sit on the cool floor across from the wall and just watch. There's nothing to interpret here. No gods, no battles, no scrolls of epics or cosmic churnings. Just the world as it was carved by those who loved it. Because by this point, the carvers didn't need a prompt. They didn't need a scene from scripture. Their hands moved like memory, quiet, sure, deliberate. This was stone made gentle. Historical fact. The final galleries of some Khmer temples, especially those associated with monastic use rather than royal display, often feature nature-themed carvings. Birds, flowers, water patterns. Less myth, more meditation. It's believed these spaces were meant for introspection for monks or visitors to sit and dissolve themselves into the rhythm of the stone. And quirky detail. Some lotus petals in these galleries contain tiny geometric grids etched into them, almost imperceptible. Possibly measuring guides, possibly spiritual diagrams, or possibly just a carver's way of keeping the world from tilting too much to one side. You rest your back against a warm pillar and stare at a carved squirrel clinging to a stalk of rice. Its proportions are strange. Its tail is far too long. Its eyes are huge, but somehow it feels true, not accurate, just honest. Because this was never about realism. It was about presence. And presence doesn't demand perfection, just attention. You reach into your pocket and find a leaf that drifted in during your walk. You press it to the stone beside a carving of the same shape. The two match almost perfectly. For a second, the real world and the carved one overlap. And now, as the golden light begins to pull again through the corridor, you understand something you didn't earlier. The carvings aren't just stories. They're resting places. For attention, for breath, for the moment when your mind stops spinning and your body remembers it's allowed to be still.
The carvers understood this. They weren't just telling tales. They were shaping silence, sculpting a place where time could slow down, where thought could soften, where even stone could seem to pause.
And so, here you are.
Not at the climax of a legend, not at the peak of a tower.
Just sitting quietly with a squirrel and a leaf and a wall that knows how to hold a secret. Because in the end, the greatest gift these carvers left behind was quiet. You step out of the gallery and back into the open air, where roots wrap the temple's base like fingers clinging to a lullaby. The final light of day stretches long across the stone, brushing over bas-reliefs with a softness you've never noticed before. Everything here feels slower now. The temple exhales. You walk the perimeter one last time, tracing the outlines of carvings whose meaning you no longer need to define. A boat mid-pedal, a bird mid-song, a god mid-blink. There's no urgency, no big ending, just completion like a sentence reaching its final word and letting it sit there full and unforced. And here at this moment, you understand. The temple is not waiting for you to be impressed. It never was. It was carved to exist, to be, to hold time and sun and stories and silence all equally. And now it holds you too. Historical fact, Angkor Wat and many of its surrounding temples were gradually abandoned after the 15th century, not because they were destroyed, but because political and spiritual life moved elsewhere. Yet the temples remain quietly, patiently, taken by jungle but never forgotten, maintained by monks, reclaimed by roots, whispered back to life by explorers centuries later. And still through it all, the carvings endured. Your fingers pass over a final relief. A tree, not mythic, not magical, just a tree. Its trunk straight, its canopy wide, carved with so much care you can almost feel the wind that once rustled its real-life twin. And here's your quirky farewell. A few reliefs scattered through Angkor's lesser-known halls depict children drawing stick-figure animals, curving spirals, simple trees. They're not mistakes. They're not vandalism. They were carved on purpose, likely by apprentices like signatures before the name. It's a reminder, even great things begin in play. You sit for a while longer, letting the sky darken. Bats begin to circle. The hum of the jungle picks up. The temple doesn't close. It doesn't turn off. It simply shifts into another rhythm, one the carvers knew well.
Night was when the stories went quiet, but not gone, because the walls are always listening, always remembering, always inviting the next visitor to slow down, breathe in and carve their own rhythm into the moment.
You lie down on the ancient stone cool now against your back. The stars flicker awake. The carvings vanish into shadow, not lost, just resting. And so do you. Let yourself soften now. Feel the quiet of the temple linger in your chest, not like a weight, but like a warmth. The carvings are behind you, but their rhythm stays. Every gentle strike of the chisel, every arc of a dancer's arm, every leaf carved in patient silence, it's still echoing somewhere beneath your skin. Your breathing is slower now. You've walked centuries tonight without ever leaving the ground. You've traced fingers over stories no one told out loud. You've stepped into the stillness between movements. And now you're allowed more than allowed to rest. Let the stone beneath you fade into softness. Let the vines wrap your thoughts like lullabies. Let the gods smile in the dark where no one can see them, and the apsaras sway ever so slightly in the cool hush of sleep. There's nothing left to uncover, nothing left to chase. Only the gentle truth the carvers knew. That beauty doesn't shout, it waits. That peace doesn't arrive. It's been here all along. And that sometimes the most sacred story is the one told with quiet hands and no name attached. So breathe out. Let your fingers go still. And drift, drift, drift. End of script. Sweet dreams.